Good evening. Welcome to another webinar on AI, the chaos, the amazing stuff that's happening. I can't keep up, even someone who's deeply buried in the space. The news that's coming at us constantly is quite overwhelming at times. But I think what's super important is that from an African content perspective, that we're continually having this conversation to figure out what the future holds. I'm really excited by some really amazing guests we have. We're going to unpack the future of jobs and will AI take my job? There's a lot of people who are afraid that AI is going to take their job. There are different phases at the moment. There are people who say that you won't lose your job to AI at the moment. You'll lose your job to somebody who understands AI. That's kind of phase one. Phase two is you might lose your job to AI. What kind of jobs are we going to lose to AI? What kind of new jobs are going to come with this new era and new industrial revolution that's sort of happening? So we're going to unpack all kinds of things. Just a couple of stats. The World Economic Forum are projecting a net loss of 14 million jobs. That's 2% of the global workforce by 2027, with 83 million jobs lost, but also 69 million created. We've got the Goldman Sachs forecasting that 300 million jobs worldwide could be lost or degraded due to AI, with the US and Europe being heavily impacted by that. We have the International Monetary Fund estimating that 300 million jobs could be affected through automation. And then we've got some experts who say that half of entry-level white-collar jobs within the States in the next 5 years, that's about 10-20% of the population could lose jobs. There's all kinds of figures at the moment. If you try and Google and ChatGPT, there's lots of different stats. The reality is we have ideas and predictions, but nobody actually knows what impact it's going to have. However, what we do know is that there's going to be a seismic impact in the way we work, the jobs that are created and taken away. And so these conversations are super important to figure out exactly how we can navigate, how you can navigate the future, how you can future-proof yourself to make sure that you can still make money to survive. And we'll talk about universal basic income and all of those kind of things as we get into the conversation. But without further ado, I would like to invite my guests onto the stage. So if you could please join me. I'll let them introduce themselves. We have some incredible people. I feel honored to be around doctors and professors. So thank you so much for joining us, guys. I think if we can just start, Prof. Katerere, we could just start with an intro from you, who you are, where you're from, and just a bit of insight into why AI is something that's part of your ecosphere.
All right, yeah, thanks, Trenton, and good evening to everybody who's watching this. So my name's David Katerere. I'm a professor of pharmaceutical science at Tshwane University of Technology, and I'm also director of the TUT CSR Cannabis and Hemp Research Hub. So I'm not an expert in AI, but I'm certainly a user of AI. And by the way, the pharmaceutical industry being sort of the second biggest industry in the world after the arms industry. So we kill people and then we try to heal them in that order, uses a lot of AI, from drug discovery now to predicting the next pandemic, for instance, and then also patient records. So there's because any industry that has a lot of data and is data driven is then amenable to AI. But as the evening goes on, we will then be able to unpack, like you say, how to future-proof yourself, how to position yourself for this wave that's coming and which nobody really can stop. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that, Prof. Dr. Walstra or Dr. Karen, I'm not sure how you like to be called, and I think I got it wrong. It's Karen, sorry. Over to you. You'll just need to unmute yourself. Don't worry about the muting thing. We'll do it all for you, but you need to unmute yourself at the bottom there, please. There we go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Walstra. I taught for many, many years and now work with schools on educational change. And one of the things is looking at AI and how do we actually get teachers to be aware of artificial intelligence? How do we get them to use it responsibly and ethically? How do we get children to use AI responsibly and ethically? And what does this mean in terms of how we teach and the kinds of things that we teach to really help people to understand this way that we're really not sure how it's going to go?
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. I think the ethical conversation is one that needs to be had on a continual basis. We know that the big kind of multinationals are just driving forward full steam ahead as this sort of, almost like there's a tech war happening between the East and the West, who are just focused on driving revenue and money. But, there are obviously deep concerns about AI safety and security. So fantastic to have you here. Thanks. Professor, Marlene Holmner, over to you. Who are you and why are you here?
Thank you so much, Trenton. So I'm Marlene Holmner. I'm a professor and the head of department of the Department of Information Science at the University of Pretoria. So ticks off nicks for all our audience watching. We have to get that plug in there. So my specialty field is information ethics. So I specialize on the ethical consequences of information technology, and with new technology comes a lot of new responsibilities and ethical questions like privacy, security, access. So these are the type of things that I'm researching currently in my department.
Great, and there's a few slides that you sent across, so I'm just going to flick through those and maybe you can just give us a bit of narrative and a bit of understanding. So here's the first one.
Yeah, I think it's just necessary that the audience realizes that we're not just creating users, but we're also creating people that's going to be making AI, and we're making the future employer. And the future employer needs to know that there's going to be 5 generations working in his workforce. And all these generations come with various attitudes towards AI. They come with various experiences that they're going to share in Workforce 5.0. And employers need to know how to get the best out of each of these generations. So that's why it's very important to go look back at the generations and how they view AI and the future of work. So if we look at workforce currently in 2025, we can see that Gen Zs are making up about 24% of the total workforce. And within 5 years from now, in 2030, we're going to have a combined workforce of about 75% that's going to be made up of millennials and Gen Zs. So Gen Zs really are the ones that were brought up technologically. They're the ones that really seek the authenticity and the inclusion. We always call them the instant generation. They want instant information, instant gratification. But they are very concerned about AI and what AI is going to mean for the potential job losses that you mentioned at the beginning of our show.
Yeah, do you want to talk us through this slide quickly? Gen Alpha?
Yeah, so Gen Alpha, we know that they're the fully born AI generation, and they expect full AI-driven personalization. And this personalization they want from educational offerings all the way to the workplace. They're the people that want value inclusivity and sustainability, and the employer really needs to look differently at Gen Alpha. They're not the people that work for money. They're the people that work for value, and values is tied with ethics. And that's why they demand ethical AI systems. And they are very keen to leave you and leave your workforce if you don't keep them happy. And that's why ethics is so important, and AI literacies that incorporate information ethics is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Karen, the general consensus, as I mentioned earlier, is that you won't lose your job tomorrow through AI, although there are obviously certain sectors. If you look at Salesforce, just cut 4,000 customer service supports, but they obviously are very big in the sort of agentic AI space and agents. But what is the general thought from you in terms of having to have AI as part of your arsenal as a worker, as a first phase of defense, so to speak?
I think AI literacy just becomes so very important in terms of being aware of it, how to use it, and just to know what it is. I think is the first step that everybody should be aware of, that we shouldn't be pretending it's not there. I think that's something that we need to empower as many people just from a knowledge of how to use it, and show them the value of you as the person still being the human in the loop. So making sure that you're checking the stuff, that you're not just using it, that you verifying the information, realizing that it's still just a technology. It might be very clever in terms of being able to answer, but is it accurate? And making sure that it's contextually correct from an African point of view, even more so because of African bias, because there's so many of us, but because of the digital divide, we actually create very little data in relation to the rest of the world. And so that's a huge problem for us from an African context. And we really need to make people aware of that, if not anything else, in terms of we're sitting here in a continent which is very large, but actually the data that we are being exposed to, most of it is not from here. And so how do we make it relevant for us, I think is really important. And that's one of the first steps that we should be making people aware of, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, well, this is a conversation, around tech colonization being a potential challenge. And as you say, the values that come from China, the values from America are very different to ours. Apart from the actual languages, and I know there are African language models that have been developed, but the values and the cultures and those nuances are very different. So I think that is definitely a challenge. Prof. Katerere, just let's get into sort of some of the jobs that are going to be lost. So we talked about Salesforce laying off customer service. The bots that we have now are like bots on steroids compared to what they used to be, even on the sort of WhatsApp level. What do you think the first phase of these jobs are over and above that? What are the first things that are going to go?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if I would say jobs are going to be lost. I think at this stage we could say jobs are going to be changed. Right. So if you're doing routine tasks, for instance, you are, likely to lose your job unless maybe you change that or you use AI to be able to change that. So definitely, I think a lot of sort of frontline work which is data driven, lots of repetitive tasks. So for instance, I can talk from like in a pharmacy, for instance, things like reading scripts might be something that changes, because in any case, nobody ever could ever read doctor scripts, which is a major risk for medication errors anyway, right? So you might find that bots might read that to the pharmacist, and then the pharmacist takes actions outside of that. Certainly in my area, being a professor, already there's a case in the US where a university student is saying, why can't students use AIs, whereas professors are using AI? So I use AI, for instance, in terms of creating test banks or question banks. Obviously, I then have to go through and see that the answers are correct, the questions are also phrased correctly, or if you're having to summarize lots and lots of research papers, it's also quite good then to be able to use AI. But I don't for a minute think that I can be replaced by AI, because I think people still want to connect with people, right? And maybe just before I forget this point, there's also the issue around cyber security and cyber crime. And it turns out that in Africa, we are also the breeding ground of a lot of these, cyber criminals, because our AI systems are rather weak, so they can practice, hacking, using and practice, train actually these AI cyber criminals, if we are to call them that, before they deploy them to other areas. So yes, on the other hand, there will be some displacement, but like every technology, there will be new jobs. So I always give the example of the cell phone, the mobile phone, and it's probably no more than 20 years old on the African continent. Before that, I mean, I'm sure you knew that you had to phone and exchange. For those of us that are old enough, you'd phone and exchange, and they would connect you to another line, literally, right, and manually. And those people lost their jobs, right? But what did we have? We started having a proliferation of all these cell phone shops, a lot of little businesses, even selling airtime. It has become a business on its own. So I think somehow every technology creates displacement, but then it also creates opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely opportunities, but I think this is a very unique situation. If you listen to Roman Yampolsky, he reckons that 99% of jobs are going to be lost. Obviously, in terms of what they are currently, and there are new jobs that will be needed. I mean, I've got some slides here from the New York Times where they basically talk about some sort of the new jobs, integration specialists, like, AI integrators, AI plumbers, AI assessors, AI trainers. These are some of the things in this integration space that they talk about. And then they have another sort of section here called taste and creative director roles, product designers, HR designers, story designers. I mean, these are things that obviously people are sort of, making up and trying to figure out. And I think the last one was trust-centered roles. So an AI auditor, an AI translator, a trust authenticator, or an AI ethicist. So there are lots of jobs that will come into play. I mean, I talk a lot about humanoids and humanoid integration. And, if you have a humanoid, it still needs to be serviced and deployed, and the language model still needs to be built in. So there certainly are going to be a lot. But if you look at the Industrial Revolution, when basically I use the image of someone with a spade and that being taken over by someone with a digger. And then if you look at the supply chain lines where humans were busy, pushing widgets into widgets, and that was all automated. So there was big job loss. However, I think this is different because this is not just about the physical side of jobs. This is also about the psychological, the mental, and the cognitive side of roles. Marlene, so what are some of the roles that you're aware? We talk about accountants, we talk about lawyers. There are all kinds of other kind of, for want of a better word, white collar jobs that are definitely in the firing line, so to speak. What are some of those roles, and how do you see that unraveling over the next sort of few months or few years?
Yeah, it's very interesting, Trenton. I do agree with the other professor that we're going to see a lot of displacement and change. And what we have to remember is in Workforce 5.0, and that's what we are talking about now, the key element is human-centeredness. So the human still has to oversee an AI bot. We are scared of jobs like normal mediocre programmers, for instance, falling away because an AI bot can program faster. An AI bot can program, doesn't need sick days, doesn't have to be in a union, so doesn't have to have any of those kind of perks. But somebody still has to check the code. And that's why the higher level, higher cognitive level jobs are going to still remain there. A big thing that we see in Workforce 5.0 is a focus on communication and empathy, the things that AI cannot give you. And that's where we'll have to have a look at to redefine our roles, lose a bit of the mundane. I don't think in an AI-driven world there's place for the mundane or the mediocre. We have to enhance it with human emotion, human empathy, and communication, and redefine our job roles in that way.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating time, and while there is certainly a dark side to this, I think there's a lot of light. I like to live in the light personally. If you think about people, working on a production line back after the Industrial Revolution, it was a pretty soulless existence. Doing the same repetitive task over and over again, and then automation and machinery freed us up from those sort of shackles. And there's a lot of damn boring jobs out there, where you're data entry, you're doing the same repetitive task over and over again. And that really is not the essence of what it is to be human. The human experience should not be something that is completely repetitive and mundane and boring every day. There is, however, a discussion around the fact that with job loss, a lot of people look for their work for purpose, even if they don't particularly like their role. It gives them purpose, So what are your thoughts on how we create purpose, how we create meaning in a changing world, and how we educate and enlighten people that the world must change, but if the world is going to change, we must change as well in terms of our attitude and our values and how we think a sort of positive existence as a human is. Dr. Walstra, maybe you could give us some insight on that, please.
So I just think if we think of ourselves as humans and as people who live in a world, I think going forward, it's how do we actually experience that world in reality, and looking at the lived thing. So spending time in nature, relationships with people, your interaction with each other. I think those types of skills and experiences are just going to become so much more important in terms of how we educate and also how we live. So not being stuck in the digital space all the time, but actually experiencing our world as people. And I think what's happened in the past is we've become very screen focused, and we almost forget that there's this other world around us for lots of people. And maybe this might be a wake-up call to say, hey, there is this other world out there that we used to go and explore. Let's perhaps go and explore that more. And maybe that's one way of things. If I think of it from a school point of view, schools predominantly, if you think about it, are relationship building spaces. Children take subjects because they like teachers or don't because they don't like teachers. Children interact and learn how to collaborate. And all of those kinds of things, I think we need to be aware that we don't want to lose those. That we can't say we just want an AI school, because where are people going to learn these social skills? And I think those are the kinds of things that we should engage with and talk about in terms of really looking at how do we interact with society? How are we kind to each other? If we look at social media and all the nastiness and ugliness around that, maybe it's saying, how can we be kinder to each other? How can we be better to each other? Looking at the cyberbullying and things we're seeing within schools and in society. Why aren't we changing around that? Because what's going to happen with AI is that will just make it worse. So how are we consciously saying, let's be proactive and be kind? The same as you were talking about the Gen Alphas, looking at how are we protecting our earth? How are we more prominent in terms of conservation? Even looking at data centers and the amount of energy that's used there. I know that's come up as a question from Gen Alphas. So how are we aware of our societies and how we're interacting, and how are we supporting each other more purposefully? How are we actually going back to old values and looking at those kinds of things in terms of us as people, and not just to focus always on the technology?
I find it quite bizarre how, the metaverse was this, at one point, was this big hype around the metaverse, but it never took off. People were even selling land. In fact, I'm guilty as charged. I think I bought some land in the metaverse, expecting things to roll. But the reality is people don't want to walk around with goggles all day. Yes, there are gamers who would be immersive. And, if you're on a Zoom call, being immersive has its value. So I think augmented is probably better than fully immersive for the general public. I want to talk about, I read an article a few weeks ago about, this chat GPT mush brain, as they called it. And if I can just come back to you, Karen, the fact that, when I use chat GPT to finesse an email, I can finesse that email myself, but ChatGPT speeds it up. But I constantly get emails now from people who write like they would never speak, and I can just see right through it. When you're educating, especially youngsters in the space you are, how are we going to educate people to work responsibly and to be real through AI and that interaction? Do you want to take that, Karen?
I think that's very important. I think, and using AI for learning and not for being lazy, and using AI not just to do the answers for you, because you still have to sit and write the exam. You still have to have an understanding of the knowledge. And I think those are really important discussions we need to have. And I mean, we hear in universities stopping AI checkers and things, but for me, it's the importance of having the discussion. And it goes back to ethics and responsibility. How are you using these tools responsibly? How are you using these tools from an ethical point of view? How can you hand in an assignment to say it's yours, but it wasn't? Why are you not putting a citation on the bottom to say how you use the AI? I read a wonderful article the other day which gave a suggestion in terms of a teacher saying to children from an ethical point of view, well, this is how I've used the AI. This is where it's created the questions. This is how I've checked it. This is how I've verified it. And actually demonstrating how they're using it to show children how to use it responsibly. And I think those are the kinds of things that we need to be in, that we shouldn't be making our brains mush. And I suppose lots of tech has done that over time. If we just think what happens with social media and the craziness that gets forwarded that people haven't checked, the same is true in terms of AI. So how are we using it responsibly and ethically? And how are we teaching the children to do that? Not to be lazy, but to use it to help you learn and understand things, perhaps that the teacher didn't explain well, or that you really just don't understand. So how do we change the way we work with the tools?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Prof.
so-
Katerere, how do we do that on the African continent when we already have huge challenges with education, the standard of education? I think that AI can be utilized in rural schools and rural areas in a very positive way. But how do we ensure that your general population who don't necessarily have as much access as possible don't just become, with inverted commas, just completely uneducated through AI?
Yeah. So look, when I talk to my students, I always say AI, just like any other technology, is a double-edged sword. So it's like a knife, right? You can use a knife for good, so you can cut bread, or you could use a knife for bad and maybe stab someone. And it's how you use the tool that matters. And it's very, very important that we use these tools ethically to cut the bread rather than to do damage. But having said that, sometimes I also wonder if we are not on the African continent caught up in this loop where we think that what's happening in the rest of the world would necessarily happen here. Because the digital divide is such that children in the rural areas don't even have access to a smartphone. There are very few of them. If they do, they don't have access to data, for instance. Right. So I actually think that the best place to be in an AI revolution is in Africa, because you can kind of choose your spaces, right? You can work in an AI-rich environment and still go back home to a sort of normal environment, if you understand what I'm saying. But having said that, again, AI is about augmentation. It's about increasing reach. So what you're saying, for instance, is that's what we should be thinking about. How is it that we could maybe have more teachers? Because we have a limitation in the number of physical teachers, right? They are pressed for time, or we don't have those. So how do we extend those services? When you look at our healthcare services, what digital technologies can we use to reduce waiting times at clinics, which is what is really the biggest frustration? How can we use these tools to make sure that medicine is efficiently distributed and at the point of use or sale? How can we even make sure that our doctors are maybe better equipped to diagnose diseases? Because again, AI and digital technologies are able to assist them, help them, with picking up certain things, right? Certain patterns. What I, at the end of the day, really would see is again about these technologies augmenting HI, human intelligence, and then really driving efficiencies, whether it's in healthcare or it's in education or even in governance. When I put this on my status, will I lose my job because of AI? One of my friends said, well, you might if you're a politician, because Albania has now appointed their first AI minister of procurement, right? Well, actually, that would not be such a bad thing. I think we can do a lot at this stage. Yeah. Thank you.
I think it very much also depends on the generation, as we were speaking earlier, because if I think about, I speak to my parents and I tell them about AI, they are never going to get medical advice from AI. They want a human, whereas I'm a lot more open to that. And if you're born into a world where AI becomes the norm, then you're more trusting of it. I want to bring in somebody just for a quick conversation. Kavitha Pillay, she works with us, so I'm bringing in a different generation, because we're all a little bit older than her. But Kavitha works, with us and does all of our digital stuff, and has been at the forefront of a lot of the marketing stuff, and is someone who has completely embraced AI and is super excited, as I am. So I'm very blessed to have her working with me. She also does all the back end for all of the webinar stuff and all the amazing graphics. So Kavitha, maybe we're a bit older and maybe a bit jaded, but as somebody younger and part of a different generation, how do you feel about AI and the opportunities it presents?
What's so funny is that I was just listening into Dr. Karen's presentation, and she mentioned there that Gen Zs are not able to keep they have a bigger chance of changing jobs. And so basically, I just wanted to speak about that because Gen Z does have a tendency to switch jobs, but Gen Z, we've been seeing jobs as like portfolio style almost. So especially because of all the waves we've seen data being depicted, like we've seen we've started off seeing the whole Nokia revolution to now hearing about humanoids. And if I just think clearly of my first experience with AI, I was 10 years old, and I used to play this game on my tablet. It was called Talking Tom. And you could just, basically the game was just to like hit the cat and it would like go like kee, kee. And then as we got older, they started to integrate a chatbot where we could now chat with Talking Tom. And it was just like super minimal, like we could just be like, hi, how are you? He would respond to us and speak back. And we also watched lots of movies of where the concept of humans using 100% of their brains was played out. So we've always had these ideas. So like now being introduced to AI is like almost giving us access to an additional brain now, which is quite exciting for us, especially because we've seen literally everything grow from Nokias to humanoids. And when I was a teacher as well, I used to be a school teacher when I just matriculated, and they introduced smart boards into my second year of being a teacher. And that was the year everything changed, because I thought I was going to be learning from the older teachers, the millennials, like they were going to teach me how to be a teacher. But I was here running from my class into other teachers' classes to show them how to use the smartboard. So I definitely think this industry is growing. And I love the concept of having an extra brain, like an additional brain. We basically don't have to sit here and figure things out. We've been learning in a way where we see other people, like older generations, having to figure everything out. And then when AI came in, we're like, yo, we just have to, like, we don't have to do all of that long run. We literally have it here. So yeah,
I think it's a question of amplifying skills as well. You know, if you are a creative and you use AI to be more creative, you're going to get a better result than somebody who's completely not creative, who's just a bit more sort of pot luck with that, you know. I believe do we have a winner for the course?
Yes. So our course, AI for Humans, an introduction to working with artificial intelligence, exactly what it is, AI for humans. I love this course, and we're giving away a course today to one lucky winner. Congratulations to Mr. Christopher Jennings. Please reach out to us after.
Well done. Are you done? Sorry. Great. Thanks, Kavitha. It's just great to hear another perspective. Oh, she's popped off. Thanks, Kavitha. Really appreciate it. Someone who's super excited about AI. Marlene, let's talk about the fear factor. Yeah, there's a lot of fear around people losing their jobs. How afraid should people be? How realistic is this? How immediate is it?
I think there's a real threat, but it depends on the individual. So the word is lifelong learning. The words are reskilling, upskilling. Make sure you stay up to date with things. We mentioned now, and Karen as well as Dr. David mentioned the fact that we're on the African continent. It makes our perspective totally different from the rest of the world, where the rest of the world will see a loss of job losses much faster than we do because we still have a digital divide. That's not necessarily bad. It also gives us space to create policies, to create legislation for safeguarding. Something that's going to have to be brought in, and we've mentioned AI literacies, but AI literacies is just a subset of information literacy. Information literacy should be brought in on primary school level, where children know how to converse with various technologies. Doesn't matter what the technology is. AI is just one more of the technologies. But then we'll see a decline in social bullying. We hope to see a decline in social media misuse and abuse. And then the same with the misuse of tools like ChatGPT and other generative AI tools. But we have to get that foundation laid, and we have to start young. But we're also in a generation where the grade generation are really fearful of this technology. They haven't even caught up to computers, and now we want to shove Gen Z's generative AI down their throat. So we have to do trouble to also tell the elderly generation awareness of what to be careful for, so that we can also help protect them. And I think we in Africa, because we've still stuck with the digital divide, we have the ground, the room to still do this. Before AI really is used to such an extent that it starts taking the jobs.
Yeah, let's just quickly talk about preparedness in terms of government and what they can do. Is our government doing anything and enough?
Yes. Well, they're doing something. So South Africa has a draft AI policy, but at the moment it's still a draft policy, and we have space to, as educators, to give comment on this. One of the professors I work with, Professor Emma Huthkamp-Bloem, she was on the UNESCO AI policy task force. So we've got the expertise in the country. We just have to be mobilized to start doing it for the country. And I don't think we need to wait for the country to have a policy before we can see what's happening in our schools, in our institutions. So there's so many good examples of good policies out there that we can adapt to incorporate the African flair to it, the Ubuntu and the African idea to information ethics. So I think everybody should start with that and do something small for your school, for your organization, for your community, to keep them safe and to see where it goes from there.
Let's talk about humanoids, something I'm very passionate about and, to give master classes on. So there's obviously the sort of white collar behind a computer sort of jobs that are going to be affected. The second phase is essentially taking AI into the physical realm. And we've seen some incredible developments with, from Optimus to Figure 1 to Unitree's G1 and moving at incredible speed. I've been following the sort of humanoid development since 2013, since Atlas came out from Boston Dynamics, and the progression over the last 24 months has been quite scary and unnerving. Do we think that we're going to have robots doing or humanoids doing our gardens, cleaning our houses, because those are obviously sort of lower income jobs? I mean, if you look at a humanoid, an autonomous humanoid, they reckon you're looking at between $20,000 and $30,000, which is the price of a mid-sized car, which you're looking at 5,000 to 7,000 rand a month. So if you can pay 5,000 to 7,000 rand a month for something that will clean your house, will cook your food, doesn't get sick, doesn't have any drama, do we feel that that's going to be sort of phase 2? I think certainly from a developing economy perspective, if you look at places like Japan, who have an aging population, who don't have a workforce, so they need these machines to sort of support that workforce. Do you think that it's realistic that, in the next 10, 20 years, we're going to get humanoids taking a lot of these kind of menial jobs? I just want to put that out. Does anybody want to answer that? Anyone feel they want to take that question?
Yeah, David, you tell.
Well, I think to avoid To avoid drama, definitely, I might pay 6,000 to 7,000 rand a month. But more seriously, I think humanoids will play a part. So loneliness is actually been declared by, say, the WHO as one of the major causes of illness, right? So it's a huge risk for illness. And I know that they have, I think it's in Colorado, where they actually piloted these humanoids that would uh, live and be companions to old people. Yeah, and I think there's definitely room for those kind of tools. So it's almost like having a dog, or maybe even a grandchild, because you can program the humanoid to ask all these sort of questions and just be a companion robot, right? And they actually found it improved the health and wellness of older people. So certainly that. But I'm sure that there are advantages to still having a human looking after your garden. They are probably able to see that this needs more fertilizer, or this this flower that can be moved here and there. I think one still needs that. So again, I don't think it's an either or situation. I think it's an and. Where possible, you might find that humans and humanoids can really complement each other, and therefore make life just a lot better. In terms of medical emergencies, when you have a humanoid, they can quite quickly call services, and in some cases it's just not possible for humans to be together. Let's say when somebody is severely disabled, it could be that the humanoid sleeps with that person and monitors the person. So definitely, that's coming. As you know, the urology clinics, particularly the one here in Pretoria, already uses, let's call them humanoid, for surgery, where a human hands might not be that dexterous. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Marlene, you had something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think that's back to the point where in this Workforce 5.0, the emphasis is on the collaboration between humans and technologies. And humanoids are just going to be one more of those technologies. And within the next 10 years, we're going to see so much more of this technology rolling out at such a higher pace. So a lot of the lower, meager job force roles are going to fall away. We already see it in the big Google warehouses where sorting, categorization, boxing, shelving, everything is done by robots with a degree of AI in them to be able to know where they have to go. We've seen this. I was in China last year where I was giving a talk on AI, and we lived in a hotel where there was like R2-D2 little machines running around, vacuuming and doing the things and knowing where to go and being able to direct themselves to the right floors if they were told to go there. So it's already happening. So it's definitely not future that we're not going to see it. We will still see that in our generation.
Absolutely. Let's talk about UBI, universal basic income. The concept of it is not lost on me. If people are losing jobs, we need to make sure that people can eat. The concept around that, for those of you who don't know, is around a dignified life. So, you would have enough money to buy the basics that you need to send your kids to school, and to basically live a life with dignity as opposed to living in poverty. And there's talks about, robot tax to try and complement that. I know that Sam Altman from OpenAI is just has a new startup called WorldCoin. So he obviously is clearly looking at this as an opportunity as things move forward. I have my doubts about UBI in developing economies and whether that will actually work. We already have large unemployment in this country, and I think I do think that in certain developing economies it can work, in the sense that if you are educating people to find purpose in other things other than materialism, and you are educating them about nature and to go back to the basics and the human experience, But in developing economies where, you know, we're not really on top of those narratives, I do fear that UBI will be a disaster in some developing economies. So I'm just interested to know everyone's opinion on that. Cara, maybe we can start with you, and then Prof. David, and then Marlene after that.
So I think that from an African point of view, it's saying, how do we value the person? And how do we grow the individual? I think there's lots of fear in terms of job loss in the lower income group brackets. And maybe it's saying, how are we actually empowering each other? So, for example, if you think with farming and the equipment and things that you're seeing within farms, how are we teaching communities to actually, one, perhaps look after the equipment, but also how are we upskilling them in terms of other areas so that they will be able to find the jobs? What are the proactive things that we are doing in the community in terms of growing people that they will be able to live in a space where they are comfortable? What about teaching things? For years, I've always said everybody should know how to grow vegetables. So how are we actually teaching ourselves to be sustainable just in our small little spaces within that space? How are we growing in that in terms of our knowledge in around the things that we are doing? So whether it's the subjects we're doing at school, whether it's the awareness, the kinds of subjects that Marlene is saying we need to already be there. We should be teaching children, how do we handle data? What is data? How do we get data? And that children actually understand these kinds of technologies within the school space. We already have got a coding and robotics curriculum, but if we look at that, we almost need to be changing it and adapting it to how do we actually cope in the world of the future, that we're really preparing our children. And if we prepare our children well, they can actually be helping their parents and their grandparents, even from a young age. So how are we doing that to make people cope?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thanks for that.
So I just wanted to jump in. And I'd like to say, Trenton, I think that work plays a huge role in socializing human beings, but also in happiness, actually. If you recall, during COVID, we were all locked up in our homes and we were quite miserable, right? I missed traffic. I actually find that going to the office breaks my day. You know, I can think of other things as I'm driving, and even getting stuck in traffic is really a part of who I am, right? So I also wonder about this nirvana issue about waking up and not doing anything, or
Well, a lot of people find
going for a
purpose
run.
in jobs. A lot of people find their purpose in a job. You know, even if they don't like it, it gives them purpose. It gives them a reason to wake up in the morning.
Exactly. Yeah. And we know that men do find purpose in jobs probably more than women, but then that's because women are working all the time, even though we don't consider what they're doing as work, as a job, right? Increasingly, actually, that the World Economic Forum says if you're a housewife and we had to quantify that the work that you do, it would be you would be unaffordable, actually, in terms of that, right? And so it's the same. I'm not sure about just waking up and saying, "Oh, today, what am I going to do?" And then, because I have money in my pocket, I have a universal grant coming through. And even when you look at the UK, where a huge part of their population has, access to benefits, you actually find that they're not very happy. They have a lot of time, but they're not very happy. A lot of sort of alcohol abuse happens because you just have too much time on your hands, as it were. So I'm all for digital technologies, but I think these digital technologies should not. And I'm all for like a minimum benefit for everybody, so that people are able to afford the basics in terms of education, in terms of healthcare. But then at the end of the day, it's just more rewarding for you to make your own money, to invest your own money, however little that money is. And that's what gives that's what gives satisfaction, and also a sense of purpose. You may know that a man who retires at 65, normally men don't do well. Within 2 years, they're dead because they have lost all sense of purpose. And
So
there are
this is
studies
a
to show
concern.
that.
Yeah, this is a concern. Marlene, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm more pessimistic about this. I think it's already shown that in even developed countries, a basic income doesn't always work. I don't think it will work in specifically African countries. I think we have a lot to do with basic education first to get the level of the country to a point where they understand the value of having this income and how to use it. We were part of a case study in one of the provinces where there was a tremendous amount of fetal alcohol syndrome babies. And the reason behind that was that the provincial government was giving grants specifically for parents who had these babies. So they were getting more and more of these babies to get more and more of these grants. So we have to be very careful that we don't fall into that category. When I was still studying, I had a professor which has now passed on, and she always said aid to Africa will kill us faster than AIDS in Africa. And that is very true. We need to know how to solve our own problems, and handouts isn't the way to do it. And I think if we have going to a workforce where we're working with technology, not against it or in competition to it, then there's ways to do it easier and faster, and we can upskill ourselves better. That a basic income then will automatically be insured, and that it wouldn't be a handout from a government.
Yeah, I'm very cynical and skeptical about UBI, especially in developing economies, especially on this continent. I just cannot see it working. I think we need to create African solutions for our environment that work. We're almost running out of time, so I'm going to just come for last comments. But I just wanted to just quickly mention that we've just launched this Cape Town International AI Masterclass Summit, which is taking place in Cape Town towards the end of November. Essentially, this is a summit where you can come, bring your laptop, and we'll teach you lots of different masterclasses about different AI software and how to integrate it, as well as wellness. Because I think the conversation to have the conversation about AI without the human experience and the wellness experience, I think, is vacuous, because this is going to seismically impact, the way we live and learn. And I think it's important that we as much as AI is supercharged for business and making money and professional, we can also use it in incredible ways to benefit ourselves as human beings. So I just want to take closing comments. What advice would you give to somebody who is afraid of losing their job to AI? I think, Prof. David, let's start with you. What advice would you give someone?
Well, you're not going to lose your job to AI if you understand AI and you can use it, right? And AI is really just to make you more efficient. So I'll give you an example. We were having to put in a proposal that was actually due today, and I was like, if I didn't have AI, how would I do this? Because I was using AI to do a lot of deep research around this subject. But of course, the proposal itself is something that I own and I can stand up to and I can defend. But it's just that the insights that AI brought out for us would have been insights that would have taken a whole conference to get to. And so look at AI as something that improves your efficiency, as an extender to who you are, rather than replacing you. And again, like I said, always think HI plus AI is better than each one separate. So human intelligence plus artificial intelligence is 1 + 1 is 5 kind of thing. Thank you.
Supercharge your brain. Thanks for that. Karen, what are your thoughts? What advice would you give to someone who's sitting on this call or watching this video going like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my job or lose the shirt off my back? What advice would you give to those people that are feeling a bit unnerved by the situation at the moment?
Well, if you've never played with AI, go and explore and play. And I think that's the first starting point, is just go and experience it. See how you can use it, not to do the work for you completely, but for you to interact with it. So like Prof was saying, that you're working together with the artificial intelligence. So just grow yourself within that, upskill yourself, become confident in terms of your own job and how you're using it, and learn about artificial around it. And if there's artificial intelligence where it can be used, and even if you are somebody who is out in the field and perhaps doesn't think there's AI, maybe it's taking your phone and actually just researching, could AI use the space that I'm in, and how could it? And just empower yourself. Always keep learning, as Marlene said. And I think that's what we need to do. Don't be afraid to learn.
I think lifelong learning is critical. And as you say, like complementing, utilizing, amplifying. And that certainly is where it's at the moment. You know, I'm doing a talk in a few weeks at a film school. And, you know, the woman who's booked it in said to me, you know, yes, our students are a bit nervous about, you know, AI and how it's going to affect their jobs. And, you know, when it comes to the creative media space, I think it's going to completely transform. I think the creative media space is going to burn, but it will rebuild in a different way. And rather than be fearful of these tools, embrace these tools and see how you can actually use those tools to enhance the creativity. I think what's also going to be super important is that, you know, for me, I believe that social media platforms are going to have to watermark anything that is AI generated. Otherwise, it'll all just become fabricated, all become dishonest. And if they do that, people will eventually go away, because while we are all attracted to this crazy AI stuff that's weird and wonderful, we still buy into the human experience. We still buy into people and personalities. And I think we've got to hang on and fight to keep what makes us human. Marlene, your last final shot of your advice to people who are quaking a little bit and a bit nervous about AI taking their job. What are your thoughts?
I would say be curious, but be cautious. Play around, because if you don't play around, as Karen said, you would never know what's out there. But never forget, the future workforce is human-centered. And that's what we have to focus on. You can work on your communication skills, your empathy, work on the skills that make you different from AI. That is your strength, and that is what will keep your job.
I think also just humanity and the human experience. How do we amplify that? How do we bring the humanness back into the world? Oh, that's for you. Sorry. Marlene?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, because people are different. Personalities are different. You know, I work with students where my multimedia students are very introverted. They don't want to communicate. They're not worried about personalities and stuff. And then my other students are very into the human experience. But I think if we realize that there's a space for both, there's a space for human experience, there's a space for humans flourishing together with AI, then I think we will stay in a safe space. And Africa in this way is still a safe space, because we can see what's going to be happening with this technology and other technologies coming within the next 10 years. And we've got the time and the space to adapt to it then. And we must just keep on the lookout. And that's what makes webinars like this so powerful. The awareness has to be there. If you don't even know you're missing something, you won't be looking for something. So we need to make sure that people know what's out there and create the awareness.
Absolutely. I am an eternal optimist. I do know there's a terrifying, side to AI and what it can do for us. But I do believe that if we harness the power of AI, we can deal with medical issues. We can deal with global warming, all the climatic challenges we have. We can really, and we spoke earlier about the MP that's been, put in place for AI. I think that, having AI in leadership could also, hold people accountable. I think we need to enter a world where transparency is key, lifelong learning, critical thinking is key, but our education system, especially in South Africa, needs to pull its socks up. It's not in a great space at the moment, but I think that if we integrate AI in a positive way, it can literally accelerate Africa in many, many positive ways. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Some great insights there. Don't be afraid of losing your job, but also don't be afraid of AI. Embrace it, get into it, watch some videos, watch some webinars, do some courses with us. We're trying to debunk it and demyth it so that it doesn't seem scary. The future is bright if we take it by the bull by the horns and we make it bright for ourselves. Guys, have a great evening and thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.